Okay. So your presentations start next week, right? Does anybody have any questions about anything?
Is there going to be a Dropbox in Georgia View?
There will be, yeah. I'll
Okay.
upload Dropbox for materials, yeah. And yeah, great job this morning, by the way. I haven't sat and assigned a grade yet, but I have all my notes to do so, so I'm probably gonna do so tomorrow morning. But yeah, rest assured, you did very well. So, so yeah.
I didn't get through all of it. but-
You have nothing to worry, well, yeah, you have nothing to worry about, right? That's-
What was it all for?
The wartime in the first grade war, the poetry from different accounts of people who were involved.
Perspectives of a nurse, 3 officers technically,
Mhm.
and 1 infantryman.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right. Any questions about anything else?
I know we're doing the final online.
Yes.
Is it going to be like, oh, you have Monday and Wednesday to take it, or hey, you have this time on
Mhm.
Tuesday to get it done?
Yeah, I'm gonna give you the week. It'll open up on Monday. Now, once you start it, you will have to finish it within those 2 hours. Yeah, but you can't pause it. You can't go back to it. But that way, yeah, you can just take it at your leisure. Right?
Okay, cool.
And that'll be easier than trying to figure out a time when everybody can be here.
My other finals online, and he's like, you have to take it at this set time
Yeah.
on this day.
Yeah.
That's it.
Mhm.
So I just want to make sure.
Is that a bigger class?
It is. It's cognitive
Okay.
psychology.
Okay.
There's
Okay. Is
12
that
of us.
Gary Fisk?
That's Dr. Huffman.
Oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
That's his
Okay,
area.
Yeah, okay. All right. Well, yeah. So anyway, yeah. You'll have the week to do it. Remember too that all you're going to have to give me for the paper is the paper, right? You're not going to have to give me an annotated bibliography. You're not going to have to give me a proposal or draft or anything like that. For this, this is a 4,000 level class. I'm going to assume that you guys don't need quite as much scaffolding as people do in a 2,000 level class. So, okay. Any other questions about anything? Okay, great. Then what do you guys want to talk about today?
The description where they go from like the marshes and Mordor to the greener pasture outside of it. So
Okay.
That's kind of a big scene change because you went from this
Yeah.
burnt, poisonous land, or not. You went from a bog filled with dead people
Uh-huh.
and lights
Yeah.
to a wasteland filled with poison pits to a pasture filled with rabbits.
Yeah, we go from these barren hills, right? The Emyn where they start out, and where Gollum catches up with them, to the dead marshes, to a wasteland that Tolkien literally describes as capital N no man's land, right? Now, for a World War I veteran, as I know Nick is well aware, this phrase has a particular resonance, right? Which we'll get to in a minute. From there, right to the Black Gate, and they end up in Ithilien. Yeah, so we got these green, from barren hills to green gardens, right? So these various forms of wasteland to this beautiful, lush, forested area, right? That is nonetheless still mostly uninhabited. And I think that that's one thing to note is that apart from the Black Gate, right, which is guarded by, orcs and trolls and, Sauron's banished servants and all that. Yeah, most of these places are at least not inhabited by anything living, or not by much that's living. We have those faces in the dead marshes, but otherwise, yeah, they're more or less traveling through unpeopled lands, right? And more importantly, I think, a lot of these are places that are scarred by war. Right, the dead marshes.
Site of a great battle.
Yeah. And we also learn as they're passing through the marshes that Gollum is more knowledgeable than one might expect, right? He can't, he's able to tell them the story of what happened here, at least in kind of general terms, right? When he names the dead marshes to them, he tells them about the dead marshes. If you can find the passage that starts with Gollum laughed, the dead marshes. Yes, that is their name. Anybody found it? Okay.
Gollum laughs at the beginning of the chapter, but that's not Gollum. That's just
Nope.
him saying ha ha.
Yeah, this is in the middle of the chapter. I have it on page 614.
I found it.
Of course okay, page number.
261.
Okay, can you start reading for us?
Gollum laughed. The dead marshes. Yes, that is their name, he cackled. You should not look at when the candles are lit. Who are they? What are they? Asked Sam, shuddering, turning to Frodo, who was now behind him. I don't know, said Frodo in a dreamlike voice, but I have seen them too. In the pools when the candles were lit, they lie in all the pools, pale faces, deep, deep under the dark water. I saw them, grim faces and evil, and noble faces and sad, many faces proud and fair, and weeds in their silver hair. But all foul, all rotting, all dead, a fell light is in them. Frodo hid his eyes in his hands. I know not who they are, but I thought I saw their men and elves and orcs beside them. Yes, said Gollum, all dead, all rotten. Elves and men and orcs, the dead marshes. There was a great battle long ago, yes, so they told him when Smeagol was young. When I was young before the Precious came, it was a great battle. Tall men with long swords and terrible elves, and Orcus shrieking. They fought on the plain for days and months at the Black Gates. But the marshes have grown since then, swallowed up the graves, always creeping.
This is kind of like the mud in the Mary Borden poem, right? That where there the mud swallowed up everything. Here the marshes swallowed up everything. Do you guys recognize which battle it is he's talking about?
One with Isildur.
Yeah,
One where you do.
exactly. Yeah, this is the battle in which Isildur cuts the ring off of Sauron's finger. Yeah, so these are the remnants of the last alliance and their enemies. And both groups are relegated to the same fate here, right? Both are swallowed up by the marshes, have had their graves swallowed up by the marshes, and are like you see the floating faces and the lit candles, right? Are either of you familiar with a creature from folklore? It's called Will-o'-the-Wisp.
Yes,
Okay, what's a Will-o'-the-Wisp?
it's a spirit,
Mhm.
essentially, and
Yeah.
it's usually the spirit of someone who died a terrible death and
Uh-huh.
wasn't given proper burial or honors.
Yeah, yeah, and they're particularly associated with swamps and bogs, right? The will-o'-the-wisp manifest as a light that you see floating around in a swamp.
They look like a candle flame.
Yeah, exactly. The idea is, to get you to, to get you to follow it, right? Now, what people were probably seeing when they said they saw will-o'-the-wisps were, swamp gas, right? But, yeah, the story is, this is a ghost or an evil spirit that leads people into swamps to drown by shining a light.
Almost like a kelpie.
Pardon?
It's almost like a kelpie.
Yeah. But I think really what's more interesting here is how much Gollum actually seems to know about this, right? He knows who these people are, and he knows the story of the battle. Which indicates that there's more to this figure than this broken, ring-obsessed shell, right? He also knows the land around here a lot better than the hobbits do, which is why they've taken him on as a guide in the first place.
Shows Smeagol's still in there somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's an indication that he wasn't always as he is, right? And it might actually be worthwhile to think a little bit about how the depiction of Gollum here both builds on and is slightly different from the way he's depicted in The Hobbit, right? What do we remember about the way he talked in The Hobbit?
Croaking, adding extra syllables.
Yep. Croaking, adding extra syllables. He makes the Gollum noise in his throat, right? Who does he usually talk to?
Precious. The ring.
Well, is Precious in the Hobbit when he says Precious? Is he talking to the ring or to
His alter ego.
Yeah, he's talking to himself, right? Because he's got no one else to talk to down there. So we have this creature that lives in the dark and talks to itself, right? Talks to himself. And in the Two Towers here, right, this is developed into something more like a split personality, right? That there seem to be two separate Gollums that argue with one another over what to do, right? And if we look a little, just like another page or two on, from there we get this conversation between the two different personalities, right? Right. Suddenly Sam woke up thinking that he heard his master calling. It was evening. Frodo could not have called, for he had fallen asleep and had slid down nearly to the bottom of the pit. Gollum was by him. For a moment Sam thought he was trying to rouse Frodo. Then he saw that it was not so. Gollum was talking to himself. Smeagol was holding a debate with some other thought that used the same voice but made it squeak and hiss. A pale light and a green light alternated in his eyes as he spoke. So he undergoes vocal and physical changes, right, as he switches between personalities. Smeagol promised, said the first thought. Yes, yes, my precious, came the answer. We promised to save our precious, not to let him have it. Never. but it's going to him, yes, nearer every step. What's the hobbit going to do with it, we wonders, yes, we wonders. I don't know, I can't help it. Master's got it. Smeagol promised to help the master. Yes, yes, to help the master of the precious. But if we was master, then we could help ourselves, yes, and still keep promises. So, what do we notice about Smeagol's reasoning here so far with himself between his two personalities? What's he trying to? What is the darker personality trying to do?
And it's the lighter one, like, take it for yourself, because then you'll be the master and
Uh-huh.
you'll still keep your promise to serve the
Exactly. Yeah.
master.
So both personalities seem to acknowledge that you have to keep a promise, right?
Yes.
So there is a kind of shared morality there. But the darker personality is engaged here in kind of semantic debate, right? Over what it really means to keep a promise, right? And to figure out how you can change the conditions of, say, ownership of the precious and still keep that promise, right? Yes, we promise to serve the master of the precious. So there's an insistence on fine points of language here, right?
Do you say that Gollum is more concerned with the semantics and Smeagol is more concerned with the, like, Gollum is saying, if we have the ring, we're master, and we still keep our promise.
Uh-huh.
And Smeagol's more concerned with keeping, like, the actual promise he made to Frodo, because Frodo's the actual master.
Uh-huh.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think, well, yeah, I think that, yeah, the darker personality, which you're calling Gollum,
Mhm.
and which Sam calls Stinker, I think, yeah, is, if he's concerned, like, if he fears anything, he fears getting caught and punished, right?
Yeah, with the elf ring.
Yeah, and so, like, he is looking for loopholes in the promise that he made that still allow him to get the thing that he wants. Whereas the personality Sam calls Slinker, the more benign personality, seems instead to be, concerned with the overall ethical implications of keeping a promise, right? That, like, no, like, I made a promise and I have to keep it. It's like, well, yeah, we can keep it, but this is how we can take the thing we want and still keep promises, yes. But Smeagol said he would be very, very good. Nice hobbit. He took cruel rope off Smeagol's leg. He speaks nicely to me. Very, very good, eh, my precious? Let's be good, good as fish, sweet one, but to ourselves. Not hurt the nice hobbit, of course, no, no. So, we've got two, they're both saying they want to be good too, right? We want to be good. But do they seem to mean the same thing by good?
No.
What does the benign personality seem to think good means, to be good?
To not hurt the hobbits.
Yeah. Don't hurt hobbits. Right? Be obedient. And keep promises, right? And what does the darker personality seem to think good means? Very, very good. Eh, my precious, let's be good, good as fish, sweet one, but to ourselves.
Work.
You think it's being good at getting the ring?
Yeah. Good for him is what's good for me, right? But oh, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
I don't remember if the book ever says, why does Gollum Smeagol have such a problem with elf material?
Well, the elves kept him prisoner, right? And he talks about, the stink of elf leaves on his hands, right, when they give him the lembas bread, right? So yeah, he does hate elves. Now, some of that might also be because he carried the ring for so long, and the ring belongs to Sauron, and Sauron hates elves.
Yeah. I couldn't remember if we ever discussed that or not.
We hadn't, but it is true, yeah, that he definitely seems to be genuinely pained whenever anything made by elves touches him, right? Or whenever he encounters anything made by elves. And whether that's psychological or physiological is never really quite made clear. But the precious holds the promise, the voice of Smeagol objected. Then take it, said the other, and let's hold it ourselves. Then we shall be mastered, Gollum. Make the other hobbit, the nasty, suspicious hobbit, make him crawl, yes, Gollum. But not the nice hobbit. Oh no, not if it doesn't please us. Still, he's a Baggins, my precious, yes, a Baggins. A Baggins stole it. He found it, he said nothing. We hates Bagginses. No, not this Baggins, yes, every Baggins. All peoples that keep the precious, we must have it. So, they do find a point they can agree on here, right? What do they both agree on?
Make Sam crawl.
Yeah, they hate Sam. Right? They both hate Sam. They think Sam is a dick, and they want to cause him pain and misery, right?
Yeah.
So this is where the two of them start making common cause here, right? And we notice that the objections after this point that the benign personality raises are less moral and more practical, right? But he'll see, he'll know, he'll take it from us. He sees, he knows, he heard us make silly promises against his orders, yes, must take it. The wraiths are searching, must take it, not for him. No, sweet one. See, my precious, if we has it, then we can escape even from him, eh? Perhaps we grows very strong, stronger than wraiths. Lord Smeagol, Gollum the Great, the Gollum. Eat fish every day, 3 times a day, fresh from the sea. Most precious Gollum. Must have it. We wants it, we wants it, we wants it. But there's 2 of them. They'll wake too quick and kill us, whined Smeagol in the last effort. Not now, not yet. We wants it. But, and here there was a long pause, as if a new thought had wakened. Not yet, eh? Perhaps not. She might help. She might, yes. No, not that way, wailed Smeagol. Yes, we wants it, we wants it. Now, when Smeagol is wailing here, like not that way, is it because he thinks it's too cruel or because he's afraid?
He's afraid.
Yeah, it's because this is something that scares him, right? Now, what's the other objection he raises here to, what are the 2 other objections he raises to acting here?
Sauron will see him and he'll come and take it.
Yeah. Right. First objection, right? He will know. And we were ordered by him not to take it, right? And then what's his second objection?
The hobbits, there's 2 hobbits, they'll kill him.
Yeah. That it's 2 versus 1. if the other hobbit, if Sam and Frodo know what he's up to, they'll work together and they'll stop him, right? And I think it's also it's interesting to note here what his dreams are for the ring, right? Now, what does the ring allow you to do?
Invisible.
To turn invisible, right? And what else?
To see the other plane.
Yeah, to see that other plane of existence, right? And to master and dominate the wills of others, right? That's the big thing that it does, right? The most important thing that it does, right? It's the ruling ring. And what does Gollum want to do with it?
Become great Gollum.
Yes, Gollum the Great. And what's different about the life of the great Gollum?
He has to eat fish 3 times a day.
That's right, yeah. All the fish he wants, right?
He's a man of simple means.
Yeah. So part of what's happening here, right, is that his wants, his desires, right, are purely carnal, right? And not in the sexual sense here, because that seems to be an idea that's completely absent from the Lord of the Rings, right?
He
But-
just wants to be powerful and eat fish.
Yeah. Yeah, he wants to eat fish 3 times a day and humiliate people who have wronged him. Right? So yeah, he wants revenge on Samwise, Sauron, and the Wraiths. And maybe even on the Baggins too. Because if Baggins stole it, and we hate Bagginses. Wicked, tricksy, false hobbits. And yeah, and he wants his physical needs met. So he doesn't seem to have any kind of higher plane of desires, right? Everything that he hopes to get from the ring is very much on the plane of the physical and to some extent on the social, right? People will have to respect him now. But I think it's also important here to note his fear regarding Sauron, right? That he will know. And remember, what is the only way Sauron manifests physically in the novel? We never actually see him, right? But what do we know that he's supposed to be? How is he represented? What's his symbol?
The eye.
Yeah, a lidless eye, right? Right. He is associated with this notion of eternal vigilance. Right. Whatever goes on, he is always watching. Right. Always watching, always searching, right? He knows. Now, I think it might be sort of good sort of by way of contrast here, since we talked here about how Gollum is represented, to talk also about the shift in perspective that starts in this half of the novel, right? So through whose eyes are we looking most of the time now? Whose shoulder are we riding over?
Sam's.
Yeah. We're no longer seeing things as Frodo sees them. We're seeing things, including Frodo, as Sam sees them. Yeah,
Instead of just Mr. Frodo.
yeah, that's true. In fact, he and Gollum both do this, right? And it's entirely possible that some of Sam's animosity towards Gollum Smeagol has to do with, perhaps his own role here being reduced or duplicated, right? Smeagol can help Frodo in a way that Samwise can't, right? And they also have a particular shared experience, right? What do Smeagol and Frodo understand about each other that Samwise does not?
The power of the ring.
Yes, they have both experienced directly the burden and the power of the ring, right? Sam, at least at this point, has never carried the ring. Frodo has only borne it for a relatively short while, and Gollum bore it for apparently centuries. But at the same time, right, this perhaps, allows, again, we don't really get much insight into Frodo's mind anymore, but this suggests that he might look upon Gollum with something more like pity, right? In fact, he says, now that I see him, I do pity him, right? But where was I going with this? So I think it's important, though, that we don't see what's going on in Frodo's head anymore. That we're only seeing him from the outside. And, we're only seeing Gollum from the outside as well, right? So if we think about the choice of Sam as perspective character, right? How is Sam and his view of the world different from Frodo and what Frodo's view of the world was? Apart from the fact that Sam has never actually directly experienced carrying the ring.
Like, Frodo understands he has to get rid of the ring. It's too powerful.
Uh-huh.
And to Sam, it's like, okay, we gotta get rid of this ring, but dang, this is a long trip to just throw away some piece of jewelry. And
Sure.
he probably doesn't feel very useful. He even says in the book, he's like, I carried all this cooking equipment from our last camp
Yeah.
and
Why?
having to cook.
Yeah. So on the one hand, yeah, like he does have. There's a point in the Fellowship of the Ring where we find that Sam had packed all this extra stuff that he thought Frodo had forgotten to be able to produce it magically when it was needed, right? And yet he himself is carrying this extra stuff that he hopes to find a use for, right? He's carrying
Cooking equipment.
and a rope, right? So we see that he wants to be useful, right? Where else do we see a difference in their perspectives or their sort of basic work? For one thing, where does Samwise rank socially compared to Frodo?
Lower class.
Yeah, Samwise is working class. Right, he's a gardener. Whereas Frodo, we know, is a well-to-do hobbit. So he is following around trying to assist someone trying to assist in forming his opinions, right, about someone who is above him in the social hierarchy, right? Which seems to be a little bit more rigid in the outside world than it is in the Shire, right? Remember too that they're also of different ages, or they're really of different generations, right? Frodo is considerably older than most of his friends, right? He is, he's about 50 when they leave the Shire. Merry, Pippin, and Samwise are all sort of closer to 30, right? Which is about when hobbits
Are considered
reach the age of maturity, right? So he is also comparatively young and inexperienced.
Well, going back to that, we understand Sam is substantially younger and
Uh-huh.
way more inexperienced than Frodo, but Frodo's also older and inexperienced. to a
Yeah,
certain degree.
that's true. Frodo has has no direct experience of the outside world either. Yeah.
But looking at, Frodo's like, I have a job to do. I'm
Uh-huh.
going to do it however I can.
Uh huh.
And Sam's like, okay, Mr. Frodo, I'll follow you on this job. But also,
Yeah.
can we see the elves? Can we see the Oliphant?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. In a lot of ways, Sam is more curious about the outside world than Frodo is, right?
Frodo just wants to get to Mordor
Yeah.
and get home.
Well, and I think that perhaps too, Frodo having, been, Bilbo's ward, maybe even takes some of this stuff for granted, right? But Sam clearly doesn't. Sam's curiosity and sense of wonder seem to be sort of in a lot of ways, he seems to have more of an imagination than Frodo does, right? That's, I think, one thing we can remember even from, the first couple chapters, right? Is that one of the things that marks Sam as different from the other working class hobbits that he's drinking with in the pub is that he has more imagination, right? He's interested in things like dragons and, his cousin seeing walking trees on the borders of the Shire and things like that, right? He loves these old tales. He's curious about the elves. He wants to see an Oliphant. And I think it's funny too, especially given how unsympathetic he is towards Gollum, how much sympathy he can display towards other kinds of others, right? I'm thinking in particular of that passage near the end of Herbs and Stewed Rabbit, when he sees the body of the dead Southron. So if somebody can when one of you finds it, you can start reading from But the Noise Grew Closer.
I just had it. Oh, I got it.
Mhm.
Here one. But the noise grew closer. They are coming, cried Damrod. See, some of the Southrons have broken from the track and are flying from the road. There they go, our men after them and the captain leading. Sam, eager to see more, went now and joined the guards. He scrambled a little way up into one of the larger of the bay trees. For a moment he caught a glimpse of swarthy men in red running down the slope some way off with green-clad warriors leaping after them, hewing them down as they fled. Arrows were thick in the air, then suddenly straight over the rim of the sheltering bank a man fell, crashing through the slender trees nearly on top of them. He came to rest in the fern a few feet away, face downward, green arrow feathers sticking from his neck below a golden collar. His scarlet robes were tattered, his corselet of overlapping brazen plates was rent and hewn, his black plaits of hair braided with gold were drenched with blood, his brown hands still clutched the hilt of a broken sword.
Keep going.
Okay. It was Sam's first view of a battle of men against men, and he did not like it much. He was glad that he could not see the dead face. He wondered what the man's name was and where he came from, and if he was really evil of heart or what lies or threats had led him on the long march from his home, and if he would not really rather have stayed there in peace, all in a flash of thought which was quickly driven from his mind. For just as Mablung stepped towards the fallen body, there was a new noise.
Okay, I'm going to pause here for a second, right?
Mhm.
So let's look at Sam's experience of this, his first experience of watching men kill each other, right? what do we notice about his thought process here?
He wonders after the man's name and what led him to leave home.
Yeah.
Like, why are you here? What is your name?
Yeah. So yeah, he kind of imagines a life for this dead person, right? Now, this is pretty close to what 18th century philosophers and literary theorists called sympathetic imagination. Right, which philosophers like David Hume believed was the basis of human morality. I don't know, have we discussed that in this class? I know we've discussed it in Brit Lit too.
I don't think we discussed it in World Lit.
No, and not in this class either.
I
No.
don't think so.
Okay, so the basic idea here. Nick, do you remember what the basic idea here is when we talk about sympathetic imagination, or sympathy as the basis of morality?
If you're talking about sensibility,
Or we're talking about similar. Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
similar
similar,
concept.
yeah.
Yeah.
imagine it's kind of an empathetic kind of thing. Like, you wonder, oh, this person dead.
Mm-hmm.
What was their life like? How did it just suddenly end?
Yeah.
What did they do? Where did they go?
Uh-huh.
Where did they live? Just a bunch of information is imagined in your head about who this person could have been,
Yeah.
and their life was just struck from them in an instant.
Yeah. And it kind of looked like, Sam here is wondering, is like, did this guy really deserve this, right? Especially as he's watching, the other, the man who was supposed to be his ally, right, just stepping over the body. There's something kind of cold and clinical about that, right? But yeah, the basic idea of sympathetic imagination, right, is that morality is based on our ability to imagine ourselves in someone else's place. So, if I want to get out of this classroom and Ashlyn, you're standing in my way, right? Why don't I just kick you out of my way or shove you over?
Because that wouldn't be right. You would end up hurting me.
Exactly. Because I know it would hurt, right? Because I'm able to imagine what would happen if someone did it to me. And because I know how it would feel if someone did it to me, I don't do it to you. I would also, like if I were to do that, something like that to one of my students, I should probably be fired, right? This is obviously someone who should not be an educator.
These tests are right home.
But yeah, and Sam seems to display, at least in this instance, an unusually strong amount of this, right? So he is particularly bothered by the death of this man whom he doesn't know from a culture that he's supposed to be at war with, right? And I think that this is one of those things that is coming directly out of Tolkien's experience as a reluctant soldier, right? Particularly a reluctant soldier with a great deal of admiration for a lot of the cultural achievements of the side he was fighting against, right? This ability to see the self in the enemy. And we see another example of Sam's peculiar sensibility. In fact, yeah, sensibility is a good word to use for this, right? Because sensibility, right, in an 18th, 19th century literary critical sense means sensitivity to sense impressions, right? Sensitivity to imagination. Then what does he see immediately after he sees this dead body and what he regards as the callous treatment of it?
He puts himself in that place.
He puts himself in that place, yeah. Great crying and shouting. Amidst it, Sam heard a shrill bellowing or trumpeting, and then a great thudding and bumping, like huge rams dinning on the ground. Where, cried Damrod to his companion. May the valor turn him aside. Mumak. To his astonishment and horror and lasting delight, Sam saw a vast shape crash out of the trees and come careering down the slope. Big as a house, much bigger than a house it looked to him, a gray-clad moving hill. Fear and wonder, maybe, enlarged him in the hobbit's eyes, but the Mumok of Harad was indeed a beast of vast bulk, and the like of him does not walk now in Middle-earth. His kin that still live in latter days are but memories of his girth and majesty. On he came straight towards the watchers, and then swerved aside in the nick of time, passing only a few yards away, rocking the ground beneath their feet, his great legs like trees, enormous sail-like ears spread out, long snout upraised like a huge serpent about to strike, his small red eyes raging. His upturned horn-like tusks were bound with bands of gold and dripped with blood. His trappings of scarlet and gold flapped about him in wild tatters. The ruins of what seemed a very war tower lay upon his heaving back, smashed in his furious passage through the woods, and high upon his neck still desperately clung a tiny figure, the body of a mighty warrior, a giant among the Swertings. On the great beast thundered, blundering in blind wrath through pool and thicket. Arrows skipped and snapped harmlessly about the triple hide of his flanks. Men of both sides fled before him, but many he overtook and crushed to the ground. Soon he was lost to view, still trumpeting and stamping far away. What became of him Sam never heard. Whether he escaped to roam the wild for a time until he perished far from his home, or was trapped in some deep pit, or whether he raged on until he plunged in the great river and was swallowed up.
So that was it.
Yeah. Or an Oliphant, right? Or you know what apparently men call a Mumok, right? So yeah, so we have within seconds of each other, right, the dead soldier and the Oliphant. And how are these two experiences different from each other for Sam?
The dead soldier, I mean, he gets more detail from him.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can see more detail about him. He has black hair braided in bands of gold,
Uh-huh.
and his skin is dark. The
Yeah.
elephant, all you can see is it's a great gray heel moving with a war tower clinging to its back.
Uh-huh. I think that's the thing to it's got
More
a
violent.
it's got a tower on its back and a tiny body, a giant among human beings still clinging to it, right? But yeah, the hugeness of the Oliphant is emphasized, right?
Well, like the dead soldier is more peaceful, and the elephant's more violent, aggressive. 'Cause it's trapezing through
Uh-huh.
an army of men.
Yeah, well, and you know, the Oliphant is still active, right?
Yeah.
And not only is it still active, it's out of control. Right, the guy who was supposed to be driving it is dead. So it's just running around like crazy all over the place. And does anyone seem to be able to control or harm it? Yeah, the arrows that they fire at it just bounce off of it, right? So it also is kind of invulnerable to attack, right? So the experience of viewing this thing should be one of pure sheer terror, right? For one in Sam's situation. But what is his terror mixed with?
Amazement.
And lasting delight, right?
Yeah.
So he's horrified and disgusted and sympathetic regarding the spectacle of the dead soldier, right? But the emotions that he experiences in relation to seeing the Oliphant are astonishment, terror, and lasting delight. Yeah, this thing is scary, it's rampaging all over the place, but it's also awesome, right? he's really susceptible to, this kind of this experience of the new, right? And I think what we have in the Oliphant, and the experience of the Oliphant here, is an example of what in Romantic era art was called the picturesque. So the picturesque is a kind of reduced or sanitized or blunted form of the experience of what's called the sublime. Do you remember what the sublime is? I see you nodding there. I'm pretty sure we talked about the idea of the sublime and the beautiful in World Lit, and I know we talked about it in Brit Lit too.
Yeah, like sublime. I remember 3 years back. Or 4 years back.
Yeah.
Well, I know if something's sublime, it's like divine almost, in a way.
Sort of. You're thinking along the
Yeah.
right lines here, right? So we're talking about the sublime. We're talking about this kind of aesthetic of awe and enormousness, right?
Yeah.
So the beautiful is that which excites desire, right? It's usually small and symmetrical and well crafted, and it's something that you feel like you could pick up and control in some way, or you could possess, right? The sublime is that which is kind of too big, either physically or conceptually, for your mind to really take in. So the experience that we tend to get of the sublime, particularly if it is not mediated through something that keeps us safe, is terror, right? A sense of our own smallness or insignificance, right? Now, what the picturesque does, the picturesque is essentially the experience of the sublime through some kind of mediating frame or from a safe distance. Which tends to change the experience from one of pure terror, right, or pure awe, to one of astonishment and terror, which also brings lasting delight, right? So Sam can delight in the Oliphant because he's viewing it from a distance in which he himself is not likely to be squashed. He's been kept away from the battle. Right? It's going the other way. But yeah, I think we do see here in Samwise a greater sensibility than we see in Frodo, right? Frodo doesn't seems to be so kind of like wrapped up in his duty and his quest, even in the early part of the Fellowship of the Ring, that he doesn't seem to think much about, say, the aesthetic implications of anything that he's doing. But Sam does this kind of thing a lot. And when one of the hobbits recites a poem, which one is it usually? Yeah. And his poetry is often kind of simple, working class hobbit stuff, right? But he seems to delight in it more than his, supposed social better does, right? Now there is kind of one more thing that I wanted to talk a little bit about today. I wanted to talk a little bit about Faramir and our first close-up experience of a man of Numenor who is not Aragorn or Boromir, right? What do you think of Faramir? What do we notice about Faramir generally?
He's nothing like Boromir at all.
Okay.
Boromir was more greedy, and Faramir is more willing to listen to Frodo's story.
Okay.
He's more just
Okay. Why would you say he's more just?
because he listens to what he doesn't make an assumption automatically.
Yeah.
He listens to
Mhm.
Frodo's side.
Okay, yeah, it's not so much that Boromir is greedy or unjust, right? But he's hasty.
Yeah.
Whereas Faramir, right, is courageous, not courageous, that's not what I meant, is,
Slow to anger.
yeah, what's, cautious. Right, he considers the case carefully before coming to any sort of decisions, right? What other differences do we notice in character between the brothers here? Is Faramir as direct in his speech as Boromir? No, yeah. Faramir beats around the bush a lot, right? Right. He doesn't lie. He's not dishonest with the hobbits, but he doesn't tell them all that he knows. Now, some of this is perhaps situational, right? He wants to, he's suspicious about what happened to his brother. And okay, so here are these two hobbits who come out of nowhere, who clearly know something about what happened to my brother. And let's just try and draw them out and see what we can get. See what they. He tests them, right? And he doesn't test them unfairly, but he also speaks less directly than his brother would have, right? And it's probably fair to say that Boromir is more a man of sort of action and battle, while Faramir is much more a man of sort of contemplation and study. All right, one thing that I do want to look at here is Faramir's speech about the history of the men of Numenor and their relationships with other human kindreds, right? So it's in the Window on the West chapter, in the middle but nearer to the end. It's the paragraph that starts with "What hope have we?" So what we get from Faramir here is a kind of lecture on Middle-earth history and anthropology. But from a kind of Numenor-centric perspective. Right, so this is a thing that we have to try to remember when he's talking about other peoples, right, and their relationships to the men of the West here. So when we find this, the thing that I really want to pull out of this is what it tells us about what the men of Gondor, right, these these last descendants of the Númenóreans in the south of Middle-earth, think about themselves, right? What their self-image looks like. So it's, what hope have we, said Faramir, it is long since we had any hope. The sword of Elendil, so on and so forth. Anybody find it yet?
And I probably read Murder and
Found it, 321.
All right,
Oh.
Almost at the
good.
bottom of the page.
Good, thank you, Nick.
What hope have we, said Faramir. It is long since we had any hope. The sword of Elendil, if it returns indeed, may rekindle it. But I do not think that it will do more than put off the evil day, unless other help unlooked for also comes from elves or men. For the enemy increases and we decrease. We are a failing people, a springless autumn. The men of Numenor, of the great lands, but for the most part they fell into evils and follies. Many became enamored of the darkness and are the blackguards. Some were given over wholly in idleness and ease, and some fought among themselves until they were conquered in their weakness by the wild men. It is not said that evil arts were ever practiced in Gondor, or that the Nameless One was ever named in honor there. And the old wisdom and beauty brought out the west remained long in the realm of Jesus, of the sons of Elendil and the fair, and they linger there still. Yet even so it was Gondor that brought about its own decay, falling by degrees into degree, and thinking that the enemy was asleep, who was only banished, not destroyed. Death was ever present, because the Numenorians, still as they had in their old kingdom, and so lost as hungered after endless life unchanging. Kings made tombs more splendid than houses of the living, and counted old names in the rolls of their decent dearer than the names of sons. Childless lords sat in aged halls, musing on heraldry. In secret chambers, withered men compounded strong elixirs, or in high, cold towers asked questions of the stars. And the last thing of the line of Anarion had no heir.
Okay, thank you. We can stop there, right? So what, from Faramir's perspective, happens over time to the men of Numenor in Middle-earth?
They die out.
Yeah. They're springless autumn. Yeah, they're dying out. And why are they dying out?
Because the men are more concerned with their ancestors and with their children.
Yeah. That's
Carry
part of
on
it,
the
yeah.
line.
There's an obsession with the past, right? And with trying to mimic that elvish sense of time, right? You know, he says that they hunger after endless life unchanging. And so they do all of these things to prolong their own lives or to prolong their own memory, right? Compounding alchemical elixirs and building tombs and things like that, right? Right? They've developed this obsession with preserving themselves into the future that has taken precedence over the need to, you know, increase the birth rate, right?
Yeah.
And what happens here as a result, in large part, he says the people brought up, the Gondor brought about its own decay, falling by degrees into dotage, and thinking that the enemy was asleep who was only banished, not destroyed. So accompanied by this is a loss of vigilance, right? That is juxtaposed against Sauron's eternal vigilance, right? He's the lidless eye, the eye that never sleeps. Whereas Numenor slowly over time falls into a kind of dotage or slumber, right? And I think if we look on the first page of The Black Gate is Closed, we see another reference to this. Upon the west of Mordor marched the gloomy range of Efelduoth, the mountains of shadow. And upon the north the broken peaks and barren ridges of Ered Lithwi, gray as ash. But as these ranges approached one another, being indeed but parts of one great wall about the mournful plains of Lithlad and of Gorgoroth, and the bitter inland sea of Nirn and amidmost, they swung out long arms northward, and between these arms there was a deep defile. This was Cirith Gorgor, the haunted pass, the entrance to the land of the enemy. High cliffs towered upon either side, and thrust forward from its mouth were two sheer hills, black-boned and bare. Upon them stood the teeth of Mordor, 2 towers strong and tall. In days long past they were built by the men of Gondor in their pride and power, after the overthrow of Sauron and his flight, lest he should seek to return to his old realm. But the strength of Gondor failed, and men slept, and for long years the towers stood empty. Then Sauron returned. Now the watchtowers which had fallen into decay were repaired and filled with arms and garrisoned with ceaseless vigilance. Stony-faced they were, with dark window holes staring north and east and west, and each window was full of sleepless eyes. So, I think this is one of the big differences we see between, the forces of good, right? Represented in large part by the elves, whose experience of time is this kind of like one long, slow, unchanging twilight summer night, right? And Sauron's forces, who seem to be eternally prepared against some future intrusion or calamity, right? There's no thought for the future among the forces of good, in part because they seem to be so focused on extending or maintaining the present, right? And that's where we're going to leave it for today and try to kind of pick it up next time, because we are about out of time. So let me give you the guide questions for the remainder of the 2 towers. And then next week we'll start the Return of the King. Yeah.
So you want us to, for Wednesday, you want us to finish this and start reading the Return of the King?
Wait.
We only went to chapter 5.
You're right.
Yeah.
See, remember what I said about being poorly organized? So you're right, yes. For Wednesday, you are going to finish the 2 towers. Yes. That is what you are going to do. You are not going to start the Return of the King until next week.
Okay.